Hey everyone, Rushlock here with our next episode of Ivagana Post from Rixx Javix. This one is a Dying Breed Part 2, a follow-up from a recent post that we had covered as well. And if you're enjoying this series, make sure to hit the like button, leave a ridiculous comments, and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive in here. Sometimes when I dock up and go AFK, I return to find a conversation happening in local. Usually this is nothing more than the usual posturing and your mama jokes, but last night was truly revealing. A few faction warfare players, just regular Joes, were having a conversation about running away from fights inside faction warfare plex. The part that really stood out to me, especially in the context of today's post, was this. Why fight someone who has no impact on factional warfare? Why indeed? For years, I've held the belief that us pirates impact low security space and by extension faction warfare space because we are the content providers. We are the danger. My bio in-game explains this position quite well, as a matter of fact. And while this is all true, it remains painfully apparent that pirates remain outsiders to the processes within the game. Keep that in mind forever. This might be a nuanced thing. It may or may not impact later in the article, but I wanted to point out the content provider part. Like, content providers, yes. The content providers, no. It's like one piece of the ecosystem, right? It is important to keep piracy itself in perspective. Piracy was not designed to be part of EVE Online. Our forefathers, Lord Zap and the other players, the players of Moo Corporation, literally invented piracy inside of EVE. It is not supported by game mechanics, or by fancy air windows or side quests. It isn't engineered into the game or often recognized by official channels. We weren't handed piracy, we created piracy from nothing. This is a proud history and one that I am proud to be a part of, and to be actively expanding on every time I log into the game. Our heritage is outsiders, rebels, rule breakers, and dark shadows. So no, we don't need anything from anyone to continue our gameplay, but 20 years on, and perhaps it is time to consider incorporating things a tiny bit more. Maybe we'll get back to this part too. I'm wondering if this is meant as the game needing to incorporate piracy more, like putting more of a spotlight, oh, not spotlight, probably a better word, support for, or mindfulness might be a good word for it, or if Rixx is saying maybe it's time for piracy to incorporate other things a tiny bit more. I'm not quite sure, but we'll get to it. Another part is... I don't know, we're not that part yet. Okay, let's keep going. Piracy is an emergent playstyle. It took a decade of complaining to finally get someone to address the issue of warp core stabilizers. So I have no misconceptions regarding this line of thinking. It very well may never happen. But I do believe that after 20 years, it is time to embrace piracy into the sandbox as a viable criminal activity worthy of individual attention. Heck, the pirate NPCs get more love and attention than we do these days. So I think this is what I was going to try and to refer to earlier was maybe like a fifth, like you have Enforcer and the Explorer and the Industrialist and all that kind of stuff with the Air Career Program. What if there was a pirate one? What if there was one like, hey, come to LowSec, get the attacks in that keep you outside the law and things like that. It probably wouldn't fit lore aesthetically in the Air program. Why would Air do that? It would almost have to have like a divergent path selection, like, hey, do the tried and true Air program, or click this little hidden button over here. I'm being facetious with that, but click this little questionable button over here, and all of a sudden, your overview changes and you're seeing things in a more raw, visceral perspective for EVE UI and options available to you. Let's see. We can argue and debate what that quote-unquote attention comes down to. That's what we were just doing, right? But basing them off of a negative security status seems like a viable starting point. So it does in terms of like what already exists in the game. The issue is that nowadays negative security status means absolutely nothing. And even if we tied it to something like an inverse of the pacifier ships, the Incom ships, where your security status can provide a buff. Maybe your negative security status can provide a buff of some sort. That would work mechanically. The negative security status still has no value, like no purpose. Back years and years ago with EVE, being negative and losing that access to high sec on that character was relevant, and now it isn't. There's absolutely no relevance to it whatsoever. We have market alts, trading alts, so many player services to move things from point A to point B. It simply does not matter to have a negative security status, both as a perk and as a penalty. They don't matter hardly at all. There's no benefit at all to having negative security status, which I think is what Rixx is going to talk about a lot in this post. And there's also next to and nearly zero penalty for being negative. So it's no longer an accomplishment. It's no longer a badge. It simply doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that's the way it should be. Maybe there's ways to improve that on both ends, but you would have to approach it from both ends. You can't simply provide a perk for being negative. You also need to actually address how can we make being negative relevant again. There's literally no reason to be negative, and even this seems like a place that could use some improvements. Pirate ships that have bonuses for increasing negative security status. I like that one. Or allowing negative players who are already criminal to sidestep the restrictions on certain plex gates. Absolutely not. Hate that idea. We can go into that in more detail, but the basic concept is, if you're going to teach people how faction warfare works, and then someone just randomly, quote-unquote, breaks the rules, and you don't know why, you're going to have a negative user experience. That person's just going to disengage from the content entirely. That's just going to create, another off-ramp for people interacting with things. It would be a poorly designed system. There might be a way to accomplish the same objective or goal through another means, but that one as presented would cause more problems than it would solve. Let's see. Or allowing negative players who are already criminal susceptible, or teaming up with NPC pirate groups to counter factional warfare activity in those systems under pressure from one side or another. I like this one a lot personally, because it leads to more immersion. What if your pirate organization threw in with a certain in-game pirate organization, either directly or parallel or to whatever capacity, but what if there was faction warfare and one of the factions you could join wasn't an empire? What if you could join a faction that wasn't one of a limited number of choices and was all empire-based? That, I think, would be an amazing, amazing option to explore. There are lots of ideas and concepts that could support this idea of bringing piracy into a more active role. Right now, faction warfare and piracy share something important. We are both operating under a ceiling that limits our progress. There is a cap to the type and class of ships that are viable inside the system. Players on both sides are being forced into making decisions on what to fly based on the limitations imposed on them by the system itself. This is critical to long-term developments and viability of these systems. This is critical to long-term development and viability of these systems. Natural ship progression is an important part of EVE's history and each of players' growth within the game. Half my hangar is useless right now, and faction warfare pilots are going to get tired of flying T1 frigates and Navy Desis after a while. Probably not. So, you've got a couple of types of faction warfare players, right? You've got the ones who are just farming LP, and beyond that statement, no longer matter. And you have the type that wants to paint the map. And neither of them is going to care what tool they use to accomplish an objective. And that objective is to paint the map or farm LP. Those are the only two types of faction warfare players that I'm aware of. You could probably identify another smaller subsect. It's like, I want to get quote-unquote good fights within the system for faction warfare. That kind of goes under the same umbrella of anyone who's looking for the quote-unquote good fight. They're either very, very niche or very, very diluted. The niche is the person who understands, all right, I'm fighting uphill to go find this quote-unquote good fight. And the delusional one is the one that thinks that their good fight is them going bopping ventures and herons with their ship that's greatly overpowered. See, I think these two things are related. I think giving pirates a more active role within the system will also help expand the choices faction warfare players are making and open up a more active progression. There is always a response to any changes, and this would be a natural response to any increase in pirate activity. I'm not asking for much here. Just throw us a few bones to help us bring more content to the game. We invented the entire concept of piracy from scratch. We can take whatever you give us and use it to make the game better. It is, after all, our entire thing. Imagine these new pirate destroyers actually being better with actual pirates flying them. See? That wasn't hard. So the idea I like the most would be, what if NPC space became NPC faction warfare, and the plexes in them had either no or greatly expanded limitations? You still have a frigate of any type can go here. Do you raise the floor value? If someone wants to use their T2 frigate, do you make it T2 frigate only? And if you can't fly a T2 frigate or a pirate frigate, then what are you doing here? Kind of a thing. Make NPC space the quote-unquote progression. There's probably some inherent problems with that I'm already seeing. like gating content in general and raising a floor value. But I'm trying to find ways to avoid dummy and a T1 frig out in a quote-unquote pirate plex, just being chased around by pirate frigates and T2 frigates all day. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with them making the attempt to make the site steal, but no one's going to get the quote-unquote good fight. Unless someone's enjoying the hunt. Someone's trying to enjoy, like, oh, we'll catch him on a gate eventually, we'll catch him on a structure or a celestial at some point. Maybe I'm not valuing that well enough. But I like the idea, the concept of faction warfare mechanics being expanded into NPC space, and player organizations that want to focus on pirate activities can throw lots in with their choice of pirate organizations within the game for lore reasons, immersion reasons, but like payoffs. There'd be a way for CSP to justify the expansion of that development in that direction. We're still waiting to see if they keep polishing and tuning faction warfare in general. It's been, over 6 months, and it's gotten quite stale on faction warfare. I don't know if CSP perceives it as a finished product now, or just they don't have the dev time to bump it up high enough in priority over this now comparatively neck-break speed of every 6 months we need to get an expansion out the door to keep marketing and sales happy. So we'll have to wait and see. But here's some ideas. Tell us what you think down in the comments down below, and we'll see you all in the next video.